For nearly 40 years, one of the greatest Eagles ever to wear midnight green waited for a phone call that never seemed to come. His record stood untouched. His number hung in memory. His impact was written into the foundation of the franchise. And yet, outside of Philadelphia, his name slowly drifted into silence. Before the NFL became a global spectacle, before wide receivers became household superstars, there was a 6'8" giant redefining the position in midnight green. He outjumped defenders who could not reach him. He caught passes others could not touch. He carried an offense through years when hope was scarce. He built something lasting in a city still searching for its football identity. But as decades passed and the league evolved, the spotlight moved on. New eras came, new legends were crowned, and the name Harold Carmichael grew quieter in the national conversation, until one day the call finally arrived. A gold jacket, a long-delayed recognition, a reminder that greatness does not disappear simply because time moves forward. This is the Eagles Chronicles, where we uncover the stories that history nearly left behind and give voice to the foundations of Philadelphia football. If you believe some legends deserve to be remembered again, make sure you're subscribed and join us as we revisit the life and legacy of the man who built the Eagles and the legend time almost left behind. Humble beginnings. Before the records, before the Pro Bowls, before the Hall of Fame gold jacket, Harold Carmichael was just a kid growing up in Jacksonville, Florida. Born on September 22, 1949, he was raised in a modest environment where discipline, work ethic, and perseverance were not slogans, they were daily realities. At William M. Raines High School, his height made him impossible to ignore, but it was his versatility that truly stood out. He ran track, played basketball, and dominated on the football field, moving with a coordination that didn't match his towering frame. Still, despite being 6'8", he wasn't chased by major national programs. He didn't have the recruiting spotlight or the headlines that follow future stars. He enrolled at Southern University, a historically black college in Louisiana, where opportunity came without glamour. There he developed quietly. Playing both tight end and wide receiver, Carmichael refined the fundamentals: route precision, timing, balance, and hands that rarely betrayed him. Southern didn't provide national television exposure, and it didn't carry the recruiting prestige of powerhouse programs, but it gave him something more important: reps, responsibility, and resilience. In that smaller spotlight, he grew into a player who understood how to fight for recognition. Long before the NFL overlooked him, Harold Carmichael had already learned how to rise without attention. Drafted, then discarded, 1971. In 1971, the NFL draft went without much noise around Harold Carmichael's name. When he was finally selected in the 7th round, 161st overall by the Philadelphia Eagles, it wasn't framed as a future cornerstone being chosen. It was a late-round flyer on a tall receiver from a small program. In that era, 7th-round picks were long shots, players brought into camp to compete for roster depth, not to define franchises. There were no expectations, no guarantees, no promises of patience. Training camp was unforgiving. The speed of the professional game was different, the margin for error smaller. Carmichael struggled to immediately translate his size into dominance, and before the season even began, the Eagles released him. Just like that, the dream felt fragile. He was briefly claimed by the Dallas Cowboys, only to be released again. In a league that rarely waits for development, his opportunity appeared to be slipping away almost as quickly as it arrived. But Philadelphia brought him back, and when he returned, he carried something different: urgency. Every practice rep mattered. Every snap became proof that he belonged. The same organization that had once let him go now gave him another chance, and this time he refused to let it slip. Being drafted had not secured his future. Being discarded nearly ended it, but the rejection that could have defined his story instead hardened his resolve. The seventh-round pick, who wasn't expected to last the summer, began building the foundation of a career that would outlive the doubts surrounding it.
The 6'8" mismatch. At 6'8" tall, Harold Carmichael didn't fit the mold of a 1970s wide receiver. He shattered it. In an era when most receivers were smaller, quicker, and used primarily for timing routes, Carmichael changed the dimensions of the field. Defensive backs simply weren't built to match his height or wingspan. Fade routes became mismatches. Jump balls turned into inevitabilities. In the red zone, quarterbacks didn't need perfection. They needed placement high enough where only he could reach. But what made Carmichael truly dangerous wasn't just his size, it was how naturally he moved at that size. He ran disciplined routes. He adjusted to the ball mid-air with balance and control. He used his body like a basketball player boxing out under the rim, shielding defenders with leverage and timing. His hands were reliable, his stride deceptively smooth. He wasn't a novelty towering over opponents. He was a technician who understood how to weaponize his frame. In many ways, he was decades ahead of the league's evolution. The modern NFL would later celebrate tall, physical receivers who dominate contested catches. Carmichael was doing it long before the passing game exploded into today's spectacle. Week after week, defenses were forced to adjust to something they rarely prepared for, a receiver who quite literally changed the geometry of coverage. He wasn't just tall, he was transformative. Becoming the face of the offense, 1970s. By the mid-1970s, Harold Carmichael was no longer fighting for a roster spot. He was the center of the Eagles' offense. In seasons when the team struggled to find consistency, he became the constant. Quarterbacks rotated, coaching philosophies shifted, wins were hard to come by. But every Sunday, number 17 lined up wide, commanding attention and delivering production. In 1973, he broke through nationally, leading the NFL in receiving touchdowns and earning first-team All-Pro honors along with his first Pro Bowl selection. It wasn't a fluke season, it was confirmation. Carmichael had become one of the league's most reliable and dangerous targets. Over the course of the decade, he would earn 4 Pro Bowl selections, a remarkable achievement considering the Eagles were not a dominant powerhouse during that era. He was more than a primary option, he was the offense's identity. When the passing game needed a play, the ball went his way. When the field tightened near the goal line, he became the mismatch no defense could ignore. On a franchise searching for direction in the 1970s, Carmichael provided stability and star power. He carried the offense through rebuilding years, quietly laying the groundwork for a competitive future. In a time before national marketing campaigns and highlight-driven fame, he became the face of the Eagles, steady, dependable, and consistently elite.
The records. As the seasons passed, Harold Carmichael's impact stopped being measured only in moments and began being etched into record books. By the time his career in Philadelphia ended, he had amassed 8,985 receiving yards and 79 touchdown receptions, numbers that stood as franchise records for decades. For years, if you spoke about Eagles' receiving history, you spoke about Carmichael first. He wasn't just productive, he was the standard every future receiver would be measured against. Perhaps even more remarkable was his durability. From 1971 through 1983, Carmichael recorded a reception in 127 consecutive games, an NFL record at the time. In an era defined by physical, punishing defense and far fewer passing attempts than today, that kind of consistency was extraordinary.
It meant he showed up every Sunday. It meant quarterbacks could depend on him no matter the opponent. It meant defenses had to account for him week after week for over a decade. The records told a story of longevity, reliability, and sustained excellence. They reflected a player who wasn't built on flash alone, but on persistence. Long after individual games faded from memory, the numbers remained. Proof that Harold Carmichael wasn't simply part of the Eagles' history, he defined it. 1980, the Super Bowl run. By 1980, the Eagles were no longer a rebuilding franchise searching for direction. Under head coach Dick Vermeil and quarterback Ron Jaworski, the team had matured into a contender, and at the heart of that transformation stood Harold Carmichael. Nearly a decade removed from being a seventh-round long shot, he was now the veteran anchor of the offense, the steady presence who had endured the losing years and helped guide the franchise toward relevance. That season, the Eagles captured the NFC East and carried their momentum into the playoffs. They defeated the Minnesota Vikings in the divisional round and then faced their longtime rivals, the Dallas Cowboys, in the NFC Championship game. In front of a charged Philadelphia crowd, the Eagles secured a decisive victory, earning their first Super Bowl appearance in franchise history. For Carmichael, the moment carried deeper meaning. He had helped build this team from the ground up, through instability, through coaching changes, through seasons where hope felt distant. Now, the payoff was within reach. Super Bowl 15 against the Oakland Raiders was physical and unforgiving. Philadelphia fought, but the night belonged to the Raiders, who won 27-10. The dream ended short of a championship. There would be no ring to crown his career. But the loss did not erase what that season represented. He had helped elevate the Eagles from obscurity to the biggest stage in football. He had been the bridge between eras, the constant through struggle, and the foundation for success. Even without the trophy, the 1980 run confirmed what his career had already proven. Harold Carmichael was not just a participant in the Eagles' history, he was one of its architects.
Why the world forgot. So how does a player with franchise records, Pro Bowl honors, an All-Pro season, and a Super Bowl appearance slowly fade from the national conversation? The answer isn't about ability, it's about era. Harold Carmichael played in the 1970s, a time when the NFL revolved around the running game and dominant defenses. Passing numbers were modest, wide receivers weren't marketed as superstars. If you weren't part of a dynasty or holding a championship trophy, history moved forward without you. The Eagles of that era were competitive, but they weren't a dominant multi-title powerhouse. They reached a Super Bowl, but they didn't win it. And in a league that measures greatness by rings, that absence quietly shaped perception. Add to that the reality of limited national television exposure, no highlight culture, no social media amplifying every spectacular catch, and Carmichael's prime years existed in a football world that didn't preserve moments the way the modern NFL does. There was also the context of where he came from. As a standout from Southern University, a historically black college, Carmichael didn't carry the same built-in spotlight as players from major national programs. At a time when HBCU players often received less media recognition, his path to prominence was steeper and his legacy easier to overlook. Then the game changed. The 1980s and 1990s ushered in explosive passing offenses and receivers who posted unprecedented numbers in a media era hungry for stars. As statistics ballooned and the league expanded its reach, earlier achievements seemed smaller by comparison, though they were extraordinary for their time. Carmichael didn't disappear because he lacked greatness. He was forgotten because he arrived too early, building a foundation before the spotlight fully learned how to shine on players like him. And as generations passed, the records remained, but the name grew quieter. The long wait for Canton. For years, the conversation circled his resume but never landed in Canton. Every Hall of Fame class announcement went, and Harold Carmichael's name was missing.
The numbers were there, the Pro Bowls were there, the All-Pro season was there. The franchise record stood untouched for decades, but the gold jacket remained just out of reach. Time moved forward, new generations entered the league, and one of the most dominant receivers of the 1970s waited quietly, his career growing more distant with each passing year. It wasn't loud frustration, it wasn't public campaigning. Carmichael carried the same steadiness that defined his playing days, but the weight was real. Nearly 4 decades after his final snap, the question lingered: had history simply moved on? Then, in 2020, as part of the Pro Football Hall of Fame's centennial class, the call finally came. The moment wasn't just about induction, it was about acknowledgement. It was the league pausing long enough to look back and recognize a foundation it once overlooked. When Carmichael stood on the stage in Canton, the emotion was unmistakable. This wasn't immediate validation, it was delayed justice. It was proof that greatness does not expire with time, even when recognition does. After decades of waiting, the long road to Canton ended not with bitterness, but with restoration. The world had taken its time, but at last it remembered. Legacy in Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, Harold never truly forgotten. Long before the Hall of Fame induction, long before the national recognition, the city understood what he meant to the franchise. For over a decade, he had been the steady force during uncertain years, the reliable target when the offense needed stability, the bridge between rebuilding seasons and championship contention. His records stood as milestones for every receiver who followed. For years, if you wanted to measure greatness in Eagles history, you measured it against number 17. That respect became permanent when the Eagles retired his jersey in 2022, ensuring that no future player would wear the number he helped define. The ceremony wasn't just about nostalgia, it was about acknowledging that the franchise's modern identity was built on foundations laid decades earlier. Beyond his playing days, Carmichael continued serving the organization as director of player development, mentoring young athletes and guiding them through the challenges of professional football. His influence didn't end with touchdowns, it extended into culture, character, and continuity. Legacy is not always loud. Sometimes it lives in standards passed down quietly from one generation to the next. In Philadelphia, Harold Carmichael's legacy is not a footnote, it is a cornerstone. He helped shape the franchise's identity long before the spotlight found it. And while the world may have taken time to remember his name, the city he helped build never stopped saying it. History does not always remember in real time. Sometimes it moves too fast, crowns new heroes, and lets the pioneers fade into the background. But foundations do not disappear simply because the spotlight shifts. Harold Carmichael stood taller than anyone on the field, carried an offense through its hardest years, set records that defined a franchise, and helped lift the Eagles to their first Super Bowl stage. He did it without noise, without self-promotion, without demanding recognition. He built the legacy long before the world was watching. And though time may have quieted his name, greatness has a way of resurfacing. Canton restored it, Philadelphia preserved it, and now it's remembered not as a forgotten chapter, but as a cornerstone of Eagles history. This has been the Eagles Chronicles, where we bring the stories behind the midnight green back into the light. If this story meant something to you, make sure you like the video, share it with fellow Eagles fans, and subscribe for more documentary-style deep dives into the legends who shaped this franchise. Because some names deserve to be heard again. Remember the name, Harold Carmichael.